Hi everyone, this is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and this week we're going to talk about blue-red in Phyrexia All We Won. As always, the notes are available to follow along at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. And getting right into it, while blue-red technically performs better than all of the Sultai pairs, it's within 5% of each of them, so it's basically tied in a four-way tie for worst archetype. This set, as I see it, basically like about half of the color pairs kind of like work and about half of them don't. And blue-red is in the doesn't work category. That's not to say it's unplayable or you can't draft it, but I do think that it had an intended theme that doesn't really come through, and I would feel reasonably comfortable straight up calling a trap. Blue-red reads like a Spells Matter deck, and I would consider that a complete miss. Notably, Serum Core Chimera, the blue-red uncommon, performs worse in blue-red than more than 10 of different commons in blue-red. But notably, it still performs better than Ichor Synthesizer, which looks like another kind of blue-red signpost common. So if you're going to play blue and red together, you do not want to try to like do the kind of prescribed blue-red thing with like oil and Spells Matter. Those cards, even Trawler Drake, are not good and don't perform well. I think that there is a way to draft blue-red that is not about those and can succeed, but that whole thing is a trap. There's some good news here, though. Basically, whenever an archetype is a trap, and the things that it tells you it should do are not things that you should do, the observed win rate is going to be lower than the win rate if you don't fall into that trap. So it's possible that blue-red's very low win rate in 17 lands is a result of too many people trying to do the thing that doesn't work. And if you do the stuff that does work, basically just playing the good cards, then you might see results that are better than those 17 lands average stats for the archetype. So if you're not trying to do the Spells Matter thing, what should you do, or why should you be blue-red? I think the best reason to be blue-red is for the combo of Barbed Batterfist or Hexgold Halberd, either of the 2-mana red 4 Mirrodin equipment, into Unctus's Retrofitter, which allows you to attack for 6 on turn 3 and have a 2/3 Toxic 1 blocker. And that just puts your opponent under a tremendous amount of pressure if they don't have an immediate removal spell for the Retrofitter. That simple interaction is really the best thing going on. And failing that, there are some other things you can do that aren't as good, but that's kind of where you want to be. The biggest weakness or trap that blue-red falls into, kind of more structurally rather than just like, hey, this spells thing doesn't work, is it's really easy for blue-red to be too small ball. For all of your cards to kind of interact only with numbers kind of 3 and below, I guess 4 with Hexgold Slash against Toxic specifically, but it's really easy to have a problem where your cards just kind of are too low impact to interact with like green or black or bigger red cards. And if you just play too much of the like kind of like, you know, just the cheap cards, if you play too many of the cheap cards, then your deck, you both need to draw your cards in the right order, and there are some decks that your cards just don't function against. So I think that you need to be really mindful when you're playing blue-red to make sure that you have high impact cards. The real trick to navigate is figuring out like what your role is and what your deck is doing. Despite the fact that you're not toxic, I don't think that you want to think of yourself as a mid-range or control deck. I've talked about how, in general, a deck not being toxic means that you're kind of definitionally in this format positioning yourself to play control in the early game because you don't want to get corrupted, and then you can kind of turn the corner later. I think with blue-red, the play pattern's kind of like that, but I think that because your cards tend to be pretty low impact by default, I think that you really want to think of yourself as an aggressive deck. But the problem is that none of your actual cheap cards are very good at attacking, and again, the biggest danger is having all of your stuff be too low impact. So you need to avoid conflating aggressive with low curve. Everything in this format wants, plays at the bottom of the curve. But I think in this deck, you want some like higher curve stuff. You want your Chimney Rabbles and your Furnace Striders as high priorities, and you want like good numbers of those cards. So you're kind of in the like big proactive space that red-green occupies in a lot of sets. So you're basically, it's good if you play something early, but you're really about, these big hasty creatures and trying to, turn the corner and win the race. The same way that red's really doing in a lot of places that I've talked about with like red-black and stuff. And so to get into more detail, like the good commons, the cards you're looking to play, basically in order are Chimney Rabble, the 4-mana 3/3 that comes with the 1/1, the 3/3 has haste, the 1/1 doesn't. Barbed Batterfist, the 2-mana for Mirrodin equipment that gives a creature +1/-1, so it basically comes with a 3/1. Ataxian Raptor, the 1/4 flying oil creature that can +1/-1 by spending oil, which notably plays really well with the Barbed Batterfist. Because the problem with Gitaxian Raptor is that it doesn't do a lot of damage over time, because unless you're spending oil, it's only attacking for 1. You only have 3 total oil to spend, so, over several turns, it's mostly just hitting for 1 a turn. But if you put the Batterfist on it, now it's like usefully clocking your opponent. Hexgold Slash, the 1-mana 2 damage or 4 damage to a toxic. Furnace Strider, the 5-mana 5/4 that comes with 2 oils and can give haste to itself or other things. Axiom Engraver, the 1/3 Rummager. And Volt Charge, the 3-mana 3 damage proliferate instant. Those are basically the commons you're looking for. You want basically as many of them as possible, and basically in that order. So note, Gitaxian Raptor is the best blue common, and really the only blue common to be prioritizing in this archetype. I also, I think that some Raptors are very good. They are really good at blocking like anything that costs 1, 2, or 3, and then as long as you have some equipment to pair with them, they turn the corner pretty well. The evasion's useful, but they do a good job of, the like I guess kind of the thing that blue-white's often doing, where you have some defensive creatures and some attacking creatures. Usually with blue-white, the defensive creatures are on the ground and the attacking creatures are in the air. Here you have that dynamic kind of flipped, where your blockers fly, which is good because you can stop opposing little flyers, and then your ground guys are like big, hasty aggro cards. So you play the Raptor to just kind of like hold everything back, and then you start getting in with your hasty creatures that follow it up. There are some other blue cards that aren't bad to have in this deck. Experimental Augury can be fine. That's the Anticipate Proliferate card. I think it's okay to have like 1 Vivisurgeon's Insight. That's the draw 3 Proliferate. I would prefer not to have it, but if you have to, it's fine. Similar situation with Mesmerizing Dose. That's kind of the claustrophobia that proliferates. This deck doesn't get a ton of value out of the Proliferate most of the time, so I don't think it's especially good, but it's playable because it can at least interact with the like big creatures that your red removal can't. It's okay to have a Quicksilver Fisher. That's the 4/3 flyer that that loots when you play it as kind of just like another high impact attacker if you don't have enough Furnace Striders. And then I think kind of the best of the like non-Raptor blue commons is actually Chrome Prowler, the 3-mana 3/2 flash that taps the thing when it enters. Looking at successful blue-red decks, so I kind of prepared the notes for this, had the basic principle about, the deck wanting to be proactive, aggressive, but not like weenie, big proactive. And then I looked at the decks that were successful, and I think that for the most part, it looked pretty similar. And one of the decks that was successful had 7 Chrome Prowlers. And I was curious, so I actually watched most of the games that deck played. 17 lands is great, by the way. You can really go into as much detail as you want, studying basically anything. If you look at their recent trophy decks, you can actually watch the draft and every game played with that deck. So if there's an archetype you're curious about, you can look at the best decks, see how they were drafted, see how the game's played. Anyway, enough plugging 17 lands, but it's great. But yeah, they had 7 Chrome Prowlers, and basically the games were just tap your things with Chrome Prowlers, attack with Chrome Prowlers, follow them up with Chimney Rabble, and just push damage and win races. And you don't need 7 Chrome Prowlers to like do that kind of thing, but it pairs well with what you should be trying to do with red. And then Malcator's Watcher and Ichor Synthesizer are kind of like your also ran 2-drops. Like, you're much, much happier to have Axiom Engravers and Barb Batterfists, but if you have to have the 2-mana 1/1 Flying Vigilance that draws a card when it dies, or the 1/3 that gets an oil counter when you cast a non-creature spell and eventually becomes a 3-power unblockable creature, those are okay filler to round out your curve, but they should not be prioritized over any of the good cards. Uncommons are important. There aren't that many commons that you want, so you need to find some good uncommons. Cinder/Slash Ravager, the red-green 5/5 that costs less for oil and does damage to all of your opponent's stuff and has vigilance and is totally busted, is better than all the cards in your colors and definitely worth splashing if you're blue-red. Retrofitter is the best non-rare that's actually in your colors. Rebel Salvo is the best removal because it actually answers the big creatures that you're generally not great at answering. All of those are really high priorities. Immobilizer can help deal with big stuff if you don't have Salvo or just whatever. It's another one of your other few good answers to big things. Exuberant Fuseling, the 1-mana 1/1 Trampler that, it's like a star 1 or whatever. Power equal to the number of oil counters, starts with 1, and then grows when your artifacts and creatures die. I think this card is pretty good and pretty relevantly informs your deck building and gameplay, because if you can hit your opponent with it multiple times after it gets big, it's very easy to win a game with it. And the best way to do that is if you have some kind of instant that gives it toughness or that kills a creature blocking with it, your opponent is usually going to want to block it with their smallest thing because it only has 1 toughness, and they just want to trade off with it and accept that they're taking some trample damage. But if they block with something small and then you Hex Gold Slash or you free from flesh your Fuseling and it lives through the combat and they take a bunch of damage, now you have this huge trampler and it's often going to be lethal or force them to like put big creatures in front of it or whatever. So worth taking and prioritizing some free from flushes and Hex Gold Slash and Volt Charges if you can get them. Urbrask's Anointer, that's the 4-mana 4/2 that does 1 damage to any target for each permanent you control with an oil counter, I think is actually largely a trap in this archetype. You need to have a lot of cards with oil to make it good, and I think a lot of the cards with oil that you would add to your deck to support this that you wouldn't normally play, things like Ichor Synthesizer and Glistener Seer, are quite bad. So I think that I'm not going to take Urbrask's Anointer early here, but if I happen to have a lot of Axiom Engravers and Gitaxian Raptors, then I'm a little bit more interested. Another kind of later pick red common that I want to shout out is Volshock Splitter. That's the equipment that gives +2/+0. It's, not something that I would say is like generally an overperformer and not an overperformer in this archetype as far as like its, overall results go. But I do think that it's worth looking out for if you're heavy on Raptors as a way to, make those high impact actual like finisher type threats. Giving them 2 extra power, is the bigger version of what I was talking about doing with Batterfist and very relevant. To talk a bit more about some of the stuff I don't think you should be doing, Glistener Seer is a card I've tried a lot that has been just truly horrible. It has some good matchups, like when it gets to block early toxic creatures, but so often, like there are just so many 3-power creatures that it is really easy for it to just not do anything. And I have not felt like the scrying makes up for going down a card, especially because I don't think that blue-red has a lot of ways to like make up the card that you've lost. It's really not where I want to be. Axiom Engraver I like. Axiom Engraver is the good way to do everything that Glistener Seer is trying to do, but I would strongly try to avoid Glistener Seer except as like a sideboard card in best of 3 situations. I mentioned before that like Serum Core Chimera and Trawler Drake don't perform well. I do think that there are decks where you can play Trawler Drake. I think the card that it most wants to be played with is Free From Flesh, and I don't think Free From Flesh is bad in the archetype. I think that Free From Flesh helps deal with, like, if you're thinking about your 1-mana interaction, right? You have Hexgold Slash and Free From Flesh. Hexgold Slash is awesome against the toxic decks. But if you're playing against, like the red-green decks, Free From Flesh lets you, for 1 mana, actually kill some of their mid-sized creatures that stop your creatures. Which is sometimes better than what Hexgold Slash would do. So if you have, and then of course Free From Flesh on Trawler Drake is amazing. It gives it +4/+4 that turn and +2/+2 permanently. Yeah, basically I think it's fine to play 2 or 3 Free From Fleshes, and if you're doing that, then I'm a little bit more interested in Trawler Drake. And of course, if I'm playing Trawler Drake, then I get a little bit more interested than I otherwise would be in Experimental Augury. But I still don't want too many of those. I really worry about mana that's not impacting the board in blue-red. Where I don't want to be is playing Furnace Skullbomb. That's another one that I've tried a lot and just costs too much mana for too little impact, punishes you too much for drawing your cards in the wrong order, where like if you draw it but you don't have a good thing to sacrifice it to put oil on, then you have to like decide if you're going to cycle it and then just be down a bunch of mana with nothing to show for it, or if you're going to like wait to draw the card that you want to put the oil on, and then you have to find a window where you can sacrifice it to target one of your things and not have that thing get destroyed in response, getting you 2 for 1 because the draw card part of the spell bomb loses its target and fizzles. I think Surgical Skull Bomb is fine. That card's kind of just generically pretty reasonable. Bouncing your opponent's creature is a good option that doesn't risk getting you 2 for 1, and if you have to cycle it, that's fine. But the upside's not really there on the red Skull Bomb most of the time. The red common 1-mana artifact that puts an oil on something, and then if you've removed an oil from something, you can spend 2 mana to make a goblin, I think is reasonable if you're not going out of your way for it. Specifically, I like it with Axiom Engraver and Gitaxian Raptor, which both freely let you remove oil. By freely, I mean without spending mana, so that you can make the goblin. I would prefer to avoid playing cards that, are only good if I have it, and I want to have enough cards to make it good, so I want, several copies of those. But in the right deck, it can do pretty well. And I think that's a pretty good overview of where I'm at with blue-red right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Twitch chat for questions. Any questions you have about the archetype, any maybe contradictory experiences you've had with other versions of the deck that have been successful, any specific cards you're wondering about whether or not they fit here, happy to discuss. While I'm letting people kind of get some questions in, this would be the segment where I would thank new patrons. No new patrons this week, that's all right. But if anyone is considering supporting the podcast, of course, head over to patreon.com/draftingarchetypes to do that, or just to look at the benefits and offerings and stuff like that. Really appreciate all of our patrons and would, certainly welcome the support. And you can get some access to notes and my logs and coaching discounts and all that. So, questions. No love for the Scamp. I sometimes play one and get lucky when drawing it early. Yeah, I think, so Scamp's an interesting one, right? Because it is definitely on plan. It is an aggressive creature. It lets you get extra damage in, but it runs into the danger of being too low impact. I do think that I prefer what Scamp is trying to do to what Glistener Seer is trying to do. I would prefer to play Scamp to playing Glistener Seer, but I think that it's not a card that has great stats, and I think for the most part you're trying to go big enough that nickel and diming your opponent's not really what the game is about. Like the added damage that Scamp offers isn't really that meaningful when you have a Furnace Strider that's like the thing that's hitting your opponent, and when you have a Raptor that's making the game not a race. So I think it's, like an okay card to have one of. I don't think it's, it's not a disaster if I see it in a deck. Every now and then it's become a card that like my opponent has and I have to answer because the game is like kind of stabilized and it has like enough counters on it to become threatening. But I don't think it's something that you should be prioritizing. So the next question is just kind of how does this compare to other blue decks? So like if the reason to be drafting this is because blue is open, then like is red what you want to be pairing it with? Which is, from on a meta level, it's an interesting question to think about the positioning of in terms of like, oh, maybe this is really relevant because there are a lot of drafts where blue's open and I want to know what to pair it with, on the one hand. On the other hand, in those drafts where you end up blue because blue's open, you usually started some other color and you're kind of committed to whatever that color was, and then you just kind of find blue as your second color. So you don't necessarily get to choose which blue deck you are in those spots. But regardless of like how often this is going to be actionable, it is the second best, I suppose, technically performing blue deck after blue-white, ahead of blue-black and blue-green. But honestly, blue-green, blue-black, and blue-red are all really, really, really close to each other. I think blue-green and blue-red, blue-green I think is a little bit more defensive. Blue-black is a little bit more of a weird like combo burn deck that kind of wants different cards. Blue-white is also looking for different cards because blue-white's looking for more of the artifact matter stuff that I think you generally don't want. Like, especially I think you don't want the 4/4 if you've played an artifact that scries to in blue-red. I think that even though blue-red can have a decent number of artifacts, I think that you really need Mandible Justicar or Justiciar to like gain life to be able to properly race with the 4/4. I think it's a pretty big liability in blue-red, even if you're doing an artifact thing. Yeah, they want slightly different cards, but I don't think that matters all that much if blue-red's open. So I don't know. I think the answer is it's about as good as the others. So question about with Surgical Skull Bomb, if you bounce a creature to your opponent's hand, what should your game plan be for blue-red for really dealing with the creature when it comes back? I mean, the answer is your your tempo deck. Meaning, like I talk about where decks are on the like tempo to attrition axis, whether you're trying to push damage or trade resources, whether it's fundamentally whether you're trying to end a game before your opponent's used all of their cards, or whether you're trying to exhaust your opponent's resources and then win after they've run out of cards. And blue-red is definitely generally trying to be a tempo deck rather than an attrition deck. You're trying to like finish your opponent off with your haste creatures before your opponent has gotten to play all of their cards, because I think that a lot of the, like, especially green decks in the format, if both of you just play all of your stuff, they're going to out attrition you. They're going to have more bigger creatures. They're going to have more card advantage. And so you need to be pushing damage with your raptors in the air and just like getting your big haste guys through before they have good blocks on them. So the Skull Bomb is a good part of that plan, because, if you're trying to end the game without your opponent being able to cast all their stuff, anytime you bounce something and your opponent doesn't get to use all the cards in their hand, that you basically killed that thing. As far as like, oh, they have some kind of like bomb I don't have a way to really deal with. I can bounce it for a little while, but that doesn't give me an answer to it long term. Yeah, that's not a thing that bounce spells do. And if your opponent has, like the 6/6 flying 4 oil counters black rare, the only card that's really going to deal with that is Mesmerizing Dose in your colors. And your red cards just aren't going to interact with it. And Skull Bomb is either going to find you time to kill them around it, or it's not. Free from Flesh plus Trawler Drake is obviously great, but Drake doesn't often get blocked, so it can be hard to get a card out of the trick right away. Any thought to when to just jam Free from Flesh as an aura early? Yeah, so my thinking is that, what you're looking for is to play Trawler Drake with a red up on turn 4, so that if your opponent uses a removal spell on it, you can like counter that and get way ahead with the Free from Flesh. As far as like, if that doesn't happen, if they don't attack into it and they don't use a removal spell on it, should you just fire it off? That's going to be just like a look at how the race is going type calculation. Like, is that going to, shave X turns off of your clock / make you kill your opponent before they kill you kind of question. That one's kind of weirdly just math. Some of that math can factor in if my opponent has, X number of removal spells that can answer, which portion of my creatures. You can factor, the mana use of the removal spells that you predict into the like damage combat math turn, race calculation that you're doing. But, basically the answer to when should you use Free from Flesh just to make your guy bigger is pretty similar to when should you just fire off a combat trick for damage. A little bit different in that the combat trick for damage is often just, only when it kills them, because it's not doing damage over time, like it's not adding long-term power. And this certainly can be, but it's, still the way to answer it is to, do math on like when the race is ending and whether it's changing things. Next up, I had a really cool blue-red artifact deck the other day. Is this like a useful niche to pay attention to? Like I said, I think that, the primary like artifact matters payoffs at common in blue-red are like the Escaped Experiment, like the 2/1 that gives -X/-0 for artifacts and I. And I've seen discussion of blue-red decks doing that, and like blue-red decks do like Chrome Prowler, and they like Barbed Batterfist, and those can kind of send you in that direction. But I really think that I just doesn't quite play the kind of game you're looking for, even if you can trigger it reasonably often. And escaped experiment risks running into the everything is too small problem of blue-red. So I'm mostly pretty skeptical of like playing blue-red like blue-white most of the time. The next question is about Monumental Facade. That's the colorless land that comes into play with 2 oil, and you can tap it and remove move an oil from it to something else, basically. And that's just a how good is your mana, but more importantly, how good is oil on your other cards question. I think most of the time you don't want to be playing cards like the Cackler, the 3 mana 2/3 Trampler that gets +1 power for each permanent you control with oil when it attacks. But the Monumental Facade is very good with that card because it's an easy, reliable way to get oil on multiple permanents. But mostly like I'm looking at Engraver and Raptor as my primary, and then Furnace Strider eventually as my primary oil cards for this archetype. And if those are all I have for it, then maybe, like, if I want to play 17 lands, then I could probably often be like 8/8/1 with that. But if I want to play 16 lands, I'm probably not going to play it. And if I have like a lot of double pips in both colors, I'm probably not going to play it unless I have some other higher impact oil things that I'm playing. But for the most part, I wouldn't prioritize that card in blue-red because I think that oil isn't really like, you have some of it, but I don't feel like it's what you're about, really. Opening Ovika in early packs is enough reason to be blue-red. I don't have a strong opinion about Ovika at this point. It is very expensive. It is pretty high impact, but I am pretty skeptical of, 7 mana blue-red card as like a thing to take early in a draft. I have generally not expected that it's a card that I would be looking to first pick. As far as like whether once you're already in blue-red you should take it when you open it, I'm not sure about that either. My guess, and I haven't studied the stats on this card or anything, but my guess is that it's worse than the premium commons, but I'm not... I have low confidence on Ovika in general. Ovika, for people who don't know the name, is the blue-red 5, so 7 mana, 6/6 flying ward, pay 3 life that gives you haste goblins equal to the mana value of non-creature spells that you cast, which is, very, very strong in the right deck if you have it in play, but also extremely expensive. How hard are you trying to avoid blue in the early picks? My answer to that and theory on when and whether you should play blue is, I would say, incomplete. I know some players who have leaned one way or another, and I don't have a firm answer on what's best for you or for me or for a player in general. I am currently open to taking, good blue rares early, like Blue Sun's Twilight is a card that I would be pretty happy to first pick. My belief is that blue can generally be expected to be drafted an amount that is commensurate with its win rate, such that if you start with a really good blue card, you'll get past blue cards at like an appropriate rate, but I wouldn't fault someone for not wanting to get involved. But I lean towards splashing a Ravager in blue-red or focus on consistency of colors. I mentioned that I would always splash Cinder/Ravager in blue-red. The card is definitely powerful enough that you should go out of your way to find a way to do it. Is Chimera in a similar spot as the Trawler that you play if you have Free from Flesh? Yeah, I think it's like not horrible to put Chimera in your deck. I think it's really bad to prioritize Chimera as like a reason to draft blue-red or just to see it as like a strong card in general. But I think it's like a fine, filler type also ran to put in the deck, and Free from Flesh makes it better. Do you like Aspirant's Ascent? I think that it is considerably worse than Free from Flesh in this archetype. You really aren't getting a lot of value out of the Toxic 1 from it. but it's, another, like, I don't think it's the end of the world if your deck has one of them type cards, but, I think I would probably like it less than a Furnace Scamp in my average blue-red deck. Someone else says they have trophied with a blue-red proliferate toxic deck. Was it just luck? I mean, I would say that blue has the ability to do that, and red can contribute to proliferate with, I believe, exactly Volt Charge, and can contribute to toxic with literally nothing. So it sounds like you managed to put some red cards in like a blue-black deck and didn't happen to have black cards. But I don't see any reason that like blue-red would be the correct colors to be in if you're trying to do the thing that blue-black does well. But you say that blue-red is generally primarily red. I would say that there are a lot more good red commons than good blue commons. However, in most tables, more people will be picking more of the red commons than the blue commons. And as a result, you could end up with either color balance. Is Trawler Drake a build around if you get a couple of them? Yes, it is, but you shouldn't go far out of your way to do it. Like, yes, but it's a bad build around. You can play like a couple extra tricks or a couple extra experimental auguries to support them, but you shouldn't like go crazy with it. And you shouldn't, like I said, you shouldn't play like Furnace Spellbomb to interact with your Trawler Drakes. One player has the experience that their chimeras usually get answered, but it feels like if you untap with them, you win. My experience has been that I will not infrequently activate a chimera multiple times and lose anyway, because the kind of game that it's playing, like the thing that I was saying about just like everything I'm doing with and around it is too small, and my opponent just like plays some cards that matter more than it, and I lose. I have played a game or two that it's taken over, but for the most part, I find that it doesn't perpetuate itself especially well, and it draws cards / maybe kills things quite slowly and in a way that just doesn't matter that much most of the time. Next up, do you find the 5/5 Reach Menace guy? That's the uncommon 5-mana red creature, whose name I'm also blanking on right now. I do like that card in this archetype. I think it's very slightly worse than Furnace Strider, but definitely gets the job done. I think both Reach and Menace are pretty relevant, and the stats are good. It's, the kind of high impact card that I am looking for. Next up, is blue-red better with a splash? I mean, if the splash is Cinder / Ravager, then yes, but I don't think that you should be like trying to find a way to add cards of another color just to do it. I think that goes for any deck, really. It's better in general if your mana is easier and you don't have to splash, but if there are good cards, then they can improve your deck. Do you think there's an amount of payoffs you could end up with where the spells matter thing is worth doing? I guess it depends on what it means to do it. Like, I think the rare payoffs, like the Spell Dancer, the 2/1 unblockable that can copy your spells, is a really strong card. And if you have one or maybe more of those, then you might want to, play one or two extra spells or prioritize, cards like Volt Charge or Experimental Augury very slightly higher. And, I mentioned that like with some of the other stuff like Trawler Drake, you can prioritize Free from Flesh a little bit higher. But like, I've talked more about Trawler Drake than it probably deserves. Like, to be clear, Trawler Drake wins less in blue-red on 17 lands, like, historically, than Ribskiff, the vehicle with Toxic 2 that really doesn't make any sense in blue-red. So the, like, amount you have to like overcome in terms of how bad the like baseline cards involved in this like spells matter space is really extreme. So it's really a space where you just shouldn't be trying to do that. Like I really hope the takeaway here is don't do the spells matter stuff. Do play the generally good red commons. You want Axiom Engraver, Barb Batterfist, Chimney Rebel, and Furnace Strider, and Hexgold Slash and Volt Charge. Like those are the commons that you want in every red deck. The same thing applies to blue-red. And then, you know, the good blue support for that is like the Raptor and some uncommons and maybe Chrome Prowler. But you should just be like the, you know, aggressive red deck and kind of don't really worry about what blue is doing to kind of change that. Just look for what blue can contribute to support that. There was another question. If splashing, are you playing prisms or just hoping to get a bunch of expanses? Ideally, expanses. Prisms are more acceptable. So usually I prefer Dune Movers to prisms. I think I still prefer Dune Mover to prism in blue-red, but it's certainly closer than it is in other archetypes. And then Experimental Augury can also kind of help splash. And of course, Axiom Engraver. All right, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. So, as always, thanks everyone for listening. Especially thanks to those of you watching live and asking questions to, you know, help make sure I've covered everything. And I will be back next week, continuing to talk about whatever the patrons vote for. So, have a good week, and I'll see you then. Bye, everyone.